Hello, and thank you for coming to this panel. This preservation panel is the second day of our festival of preservation, and the idea of this was to give to take it from a larger notion of preservation, not just about restoring, restore film. It's just why this is a little bit more ambitious than just a series of beautiful restoration, which we have, by the way. But so as I think of it, the notion of preservation is made of three main components. One is to make it possible to create an awareness about the need to preserve film culture and to preserve film, and to create an environment for that. The other thing is to get the audience to go and watch these films. And then the third part is actually to physically restore them. So we have today here with us three pillars of this equation. And I'm really grateful that I had the privilege of working with them in different endeavors, and I'm so grateful that they're here for this first edition of the Preservation Film Festival. So the way you will meet the three of them, and I structured this panel in two phases. There would be one which is a more conversational part about the culture of preservation and the movement of preservation, and then there is a second part which is more like it's more into the process of preservation itself. So before we turn the light off and we show a couple of trailers, and then I introduce our guest. I want to thank the guest, which you will meet, and also thank our sponsors, the supporters, the Suffolk Film Commission, the David Bonnet Foundation, and a generous anonymous donor who donated in the name of Roger Allmeyer, which is a pioneer of film preservation. And also after this will be a Q&A, and then you're all invited to join us to continue the conversation on the third floor for a brunch. So the trailer can go on. Thank you. I'd like to call here with me Margaret Bodde, Executive Director of the Film Foundation, and Bruce Goldstein, Director of Repertory of Film Forum and founder of Rialto Pictures. Yes. Oh, well, should we bring her closer? Sorry? I thought we had a third. Should we come closer together? Yeah. Just okay. You got your poster? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I got everything. Oh, we're doing the distance. Yeah, that was. I forgot. This is enough. You want to Margaret? I got it. He's going to use them both. I should know this since I do Q&As myself. Yeah. I warned Giulia that I've never been on a panel. I thought this was going to be a quiz show, actually. Well, I'll start with the first quiz. The wider audience doesn't really is not necessarily aware that there is a need to save, quote unquote, film, or at least it wasn't for a while. Can you give us a context of the need and the urgency of film preservation from your perspective?
Hello. I think at this, in the present day, I do feel like there is a great deal of awareness about film as an ephemeral art form. Obviously when the Film Foundation began in 1990, and in the years leading up to that, there was almost, very little awareness. I think there was awareness in museum and archival communities and amongst filmmakers and film obsessives, of which Marty and people like Curtis Hanson and Steven Spielberg, and there were a number of people in LA, particularly filmmakers, who would gather. Paul Schrader, that group of directors would gather and just show any print they could find. 16 millimeter prints, obviously, because they were in their homes. So it was a kind of known in the kind of smaller circles. And then, but over the years, I mean, don't you think it's really, I think people are pretty aware of it. There's enough film preservation festivals and TCM. People understand that this is something that needs to be preserved, don't you think?
Yeah, when we were growing up, we took what we could get, actually. You know, it didn't matter what it, you know, the quality. We didn't care. There were 100 splices. I could tell you the splices in the prints of Duck Soup we used to show, because that same print would show in every cinema and on television, you know. So we were forgiving because we just wanted to see the material. But when I started the Film Forum Repertory in '87, I realized that the old model of repertory theater wasn't going to, with the rise of VHS, you know, but that was the gold standard. It wouldn't do to just show crummy prints, a lot of faded prints. You know, it was really hard to get color prints. And it was really hard to get films of more recent vintage, like from the 70s, which is weird, you know. So my campaign when I started was to get new prints. We weren't talking about restorations, just new prints back in circulation. And we started a program, and we've put like 300 or 400 new prints into circulation. But that has nothing to do with preservation. That's something else, right?
Well, you know, I think it's really, you know, it's a cliche, but we always talk about it as being two sides of the same coin. You know, there's preservation and then there's access. You have to be able to show these films to audiences because, you know, it's a circular loop. You know, if you don't know cinema, if you don't care about cinema, who cares about preserving it? You know, there has to be this appreciation. That's where the preservation comes from of any art form.
Well, when we began, it was really difficult for us to get access to films. The studios didn't have classic arms at that time. Marty played a big part in making that awareness that you have to show these films, not just archive them. And it took us a long time to get the studios on board, and we were not part of FIAF, so we didn't have access to UCLA MoMA or George Eastman House in the beginning. We depended on private collectors like William K. Everson, who Dave Curnow remembers. It was a real struggle to get, you know, the studios on board, and now we work with all the studios. And I want to say something else about digital. It's really made the whole thing more democratic because you could show these films anywhere now. When we started, when it was 35, it was just a small group of elite theaters, you know, who could show 35 and do changeovers. Very few could. Now you could show these films, these beautiful restorations anywhere, basically.
Even on Blu-ray in a small theater.
Yeah, the small theaters use Blu-ray, and it's quite okay.
It's acceptable, yeah.
It's acceptable.
Acceptable.
We wouldn't show it.
Exactly.
Actually, maybe occasionally we would.
Now, do you remember when we were doing the spaghetti western and you didn't
we
want to do? Yeah.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, we did one.
We did.
Which wasn't available.
That was a great series, by the way. Can I say something else? That this theater is amazing.
Thank you.
It really is. I was last here well, you showed me when it was under construction from the outside, but when I was last here, I showed Grey Gardens here at the East Hampton Film Festival over 20 years ago, and it was a big, musty barn. And now it's this gorgeous cinema. Amazing.
I want to go back to what we were talking about, you know, making people want to go and see this thing. So creating a culture for film's history appreciation. And both you, Margaret, and Bruce have really fostered this passion for film history, not in a I would say scholarly, academic. Yeah, exactly. Not in an academic way, but in an extreme, you know, in an enjoyable way. And you've been making film history be relevant to the present. And I want to ask you about the challenges of that, and in particular for you, Bruce. You create this world at Film Forum and with Rialto, where people really are passionate about what is considered old films, but now they feel vibrant and just as close to us as what's made today.
We had a huge hit this summer with a movie called La Piscine, with a huge hit. You couldn't even imagine. We were covered in the Times in the style section, and then Le Figaro called me and interviewed me. Radio France. I mean, it was big. Then Richard Brody writes article on his blog or in the New Yorker that says, why are New Yorkers worshiping this film? I said, they're not worshiping the film. They're going to movies to have a good time. And that's what movie theater should be. It's not a college course. It's a night out at the movies. I don't think it's such a great movie.
With Romy Scheider and Ellen DeLon,
We showed it.
But he would behoove us a post-COVID bonanza. We really needed that box office.
One of the things that I love that, and we have a shared kind of little hit now with Chess of the Wind.
That's a great story.
The Film Foundation has a program called the World Cinema Project, which Marty started in 2007 to kind of do what we've done, through the years through the Film Foundation, bring that to regions where archival infrastructure is lacking, and basically kind of try to discover these films and have audiences rediscover them. So in addition to restoring these films, we get distribution rights to them where we can in different territories so that they can be seen. And so there's this film that was made in 1976 by a director, Mohammad Reza Aslani, and it was shown at the Tehran Film Festival, and then like a couple of years later, it was banned.
It only had 2 screenings in Iran, and it was banned. It had some homosexuality the post-revolutionary government didn't like.
Just all around
and
decadence.
it was just lost for maybe 40 years. Well, you tell the rest of the story.
So basically, a couple of years ago, we just received word that the negative had been found in Tehran. There were many different stories. It was like an antique store. It was
a junk shop.
It was, I think
flea market.
These things had to be kind of necessarily murky because there was this kind of clandestine effort to get the negative to Paris. And so, it got to Paris, and we have partners in Paris and in Bologna. They have a lab, L'Image Retrouvée, that were able to scan the negative and do the restoration with the director, with Mr. Aslani, and with his daughter Gita, who lives in
Amir,
and his son Amir, and the cinematographer. And so this film, there's this adage that I think speaks to what Giulia was talking about, which is, there's no old films. There's just films you haven't seen. So this is a perfect example of that.
We never call them old movies.
Yeah, people do.
If you've never seen them, they're brand new.
Exactly. So this is an example of a film that people almost didn't really know. Most people didn't know it even existed.
It's completely obscure. He only made one other feature film.
Yeah.
And he's still with us. We just did a 3-continent Zoom with him and Gita in Spain, Mr. Aslani in Tehran, and it was nice. It's on our website.
Yeah, it's in 24 theaters in France, across France, and
it's doing quite well with us. We held it over a few weeks.
Yeah, it's a really interesting film, but it just these kinds of discoveries, expand our kind of the canon and the sense of what kinds of films were being made where throughout history, and you can it just fills in a lot of gaps. So that's the other piece of preservation is understanding the history of a art form. Dave, we've talked about that, of just like films that are just not even available now, that we can't see, that are parts of bodies of work of specific directors or writers or actors or cinematographers, and it's just it's a constant discovery, I think.
Yeah, there's this
I want to pick up on that because there is an archaeological dimension to the work, and I don't know how much our audience is aware of how difficult sometimes is, even with studio films, to find the elements, to find a negative that is good enough to scan and to do. So if you can talk a little bit about this lost parts of history, not in a catastrophic, not necessarily in an apocalyptic way, but it's a challenge. Films are just not there to be discovered. There is a lot of work in trying to, find the right things, and even in one thing is a Iranian film that was shown twice, but studio films are not available anymore. I chose the trailer of the conversation over the other Iranian masterpiece that you're going to be releasing in the spring,
Runner.
which is The Runner, because nobody would think that there is a problem in finding,
Well,
the
actually,
conversation.
the runner is a real problem.
No, The Runner, I know, but,
Yeah.
but I chose the conversation because it seems like something that would be readily available. But, even that one was a lot of work and so forth.
Well,
So can you
it-
talk
it-
a little bit about...
Well, getting the conversation, it took us 25 years to convince Zoetrope to let us do it. And now that we have, Coppola has granted us theatrical rights for nothing for 4 of his other movies, including Apocalypse Now. But we're only talking about theatrical. It's a very small market, actually. We don't have streaming rights. We don't have Blu-ray rights. We just have theatrical, which is shrinking. But luckily, we have the cinema in Sag Harbor now. We could we could show all of them. But we're actually going to open that at Film Forum in a 35 print that Coppola supervised. And the reason I wanted to do that is that the conversation is kind of readily available now. You could see it on Amazon. I shouldn't be telling them that, but you can. So you can also show it digitally if you want. But at Film Forum, we're going to show it in a new 35 print. In here, too.
Here,
Yeah.
we're ready.
Yeah,
We're ready,
yeah.
So,
But-
but I want to go back
Go
to this idea of how things are easily lost that we take for, we wouldn't imagine that they would be destroyed, negative destroyed, and studios not necessarily knowing some, fires, floods, all these big slices of history that are.
I mean, there's the issue of, so many original negatives just don't exist. That's where it starts, right? It's like with nitrate, films that were shot on nitrate, which is, as everyone knows, kind of, flammable, combustible, were destroyed, routinely destroyed because they were unsafe and it was a danger to store them. And they dumped them in the Pacific Ocean. It was just, kind of a protocol, really. And the technology that replaced a lot of the nitrate and a lot of the then Eastman color after nitrate was really subpar. So we have like CRIs of films that then...
And also Fox destroyed, Dave, is that true? They destroyed their YCMs on everything,
yeah.
which is the 3-strip Technicolor negatives. So they only had... He's the expert on this.
Come on up.
Dave is the Dave being called is Dave Kerr. You might have met him before here in Sag Harbor. He's a curator for with MoMA that already graced us with his presence, and he's gonna be introducing Forbidden Paradise and Night of the Living Dead.
But let's interview
during this
Dave now
festival.
about this because he knows. Also, the studios used to print off the camera negative on reissues. Is that correct? And they would wear out the original camera negatives on a lot of big pictures like King Kong and, yeah.
Well, it's often easier to restore an unknown film than a famous one because the negatives were worn out so long
Yeah.
ago. We have the only surviving fine-grained print of Casablanca at the museum, and the negative was worn out some time ago, and when Warner's wants to reissue Casablanca, they come to us.
Is that the nitrate they showed in
No, that's
Rochester?
something else. We also have an original nitrate
Yeah.
print of Casablanca. that
I
gets
saw,
shown
it was
once
great.
in a while, yeah.
That Dave guards with his life.
Yeah.
It's
But,
somebody else's
but
problem.
Dave, I think it's
Yeah.
actually the studios are, unless you're talking about the silent era and very early talkie era, the Hollywood films are pretty secure as far as their history after like 1931, 32.
Yeah, you'd
but-
be surprised. I mean,
But
sometimes
I find it the most difficult films to find are independent films from the 70s, believe it or not. And a lot of films from the 70s and 60s have disappeared.
Yeah, those are legal issues, rights issues.
Yeah.
It's going to get worse because the deals in the 80s and 90s were really so
Yeah.
complicated.
Yeah.
So
and-
it's easier for us to find a film from the 30s
Yeah.
than a film from the 70s, or
Well, there's this. I mean, one of the restorations that we worked on a couple of years ago with UCLA is a film called Wanda, by the director Barbara Loden, and she made one film, and I think it was 1970. And UCLA basically just got a call from a lab that was closing, and they said, "We're closing, and we're going to junk everything tomorrow." So they sent, Ross Lippman and a couple archivists went over there, and Ross saw something that said Wanda, but then it had the producer's name. It had a man's name on it. And he was just kind of like, could that be? So threw that and a bunch of other stuff in their van, and then they, it turned out to be it was the negative. It was the original negative. It was going to be junked the next day. And that's a film that,
what people don't realizing how important labeling is.
Oh.
No, this is true. The famous story is there was a Lon Chaney film with Joan Crawford called The Unknown. You'll probably correct my story, Dave, but I'm going to tell it my way anyway, okay? So this was considered a lost movie. And then one day at the Cinémathèque Française, they saw a box labeled L'Inconnu, The Unknown. They thought it was an unknown film. That was the title of the movie, and they found it. We also found, I'll tell you later.
Okay. Yeah, and in this speaking of this, of films where the negative stays unavailable or risk to get lost. I mean, we have Night of the Living Dead showing it tonight, and that negative was not at risk. It was just simply kept by a group of producers for all these years, and just they never shared it, and it was
it had gone public domain, or
yeah,
at least that was the perception.
Yeah.
Give away the whole show tonight.
Yeah, I'm sorry. All right, I'll shut up.
Well, that is a really important factor sometimes too. Is that there's people who own the rights to these films, and with the World Cinema Project and with around the world, sometimes they become attached to the idea that their film has this enormous value. I mean, obviously it has value, but they'll want, they think that there's there's like a pot of gold or something. And there's, notorious rights holders in Italy.
Many.
Yeah,
there's one guy who's related to, I won't mention him.
You won't mention the
Aurelia De Laurentiis.
Yeah, it was a lot
who
of
has
Italian
controlled the negatives
producers.
of some of the masterworks
of Fellini's movies, and we have a film called Gold of Naples we want to reissue. But I think
he just will not. We've Marty and Robert De Niro. There's been personal outreach to this guy, trying to say, can we just access the negative? We're not going to distribute it, but there's a mentality of it's mine. Don't. Well,
in that case, these films do have great value, but there are producers who own one film.
Yeah.
I remember a Wellman film controlled by, I forgot which one. This guy controlled it. I wanted it in the Wellman. He wanted $10,000 to show it once in New York. They think there's a gold mine, and there's not.
Yeah, the spaghetti western was interesting that way, because there's all these Italian producers that produce. Independent cinema is more vulnerable because rights fluctuate, and then there is one person that, thinks that they're sitting, again on a gold mine, and they have these great ideas. And they remember, I remember calling people and say, yes, can you? I would like to show that film. It's like, how much do you offer? And it was like, we're showing it. It's very.
We managed to get everything, right?
Yeah, we did.
It was amazing.
Yeah, that was a tough one.
We worked together on my first reissue of Nights of Cabiria, which was 1999, and we're doing another one. Plug. But there was
you share with some of us, yeah.
Did you? Are you showing?
We did
it?
a special screening.
Oh, you did the screening.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's a scene in there called "The Man with the Sax Scene," and that was not in the original U.S. release. But I had seen it, the sequence, a very doopy clip of it, in Gideon Bachman. Was it Gideon Bachman who made the films on Fellini? And there that was, and I said, we've got to put this back in. And we had Studio Canal check every print or element in the world. Finally, they found a print in France that said, Les Nuits de Cabiria, version longue. I said, look in that can. And they found it, and we put it back in. And it's actually it's a long story about how Dino De Laurentiis stole the negative in the middle of the night and cut it. He thought it was too long. He cut it out. But it's a really important scene in the movie, because it shows Cabiria what her life is going to be, and taking it out.
I know.
Yeah, so that was my one
producer-
big archaeological dig.
So the producer didn't know more than the director about what should be in the film?
Well, of course, it was Dino De Laurentiis.
Yeah.
It was Dino.
Well, this is us taking thanks to Bruce, a much looser approach that I had envisioned. So I think it would be good to call our other guest, because and I need to introduce him. because the accomplishments are so many that I need to read some. So I want to call here to the panel Balasz Nyari. Is the founder of Cineric, one of the people that actually make this restoration, one of the organizations that make this restoration. Balasz, please join us.
Well,
And
well,
just I think this has gotten looser, and
hope so.
Sorry.
yeah, and Cineric was founded in 1982. Has worked with all the studio, 20th Century Fox, Sony, the Walt Disney Company, with all the archives, the Academy, George Eastman House, International Olympic Committee, and they are incredibly generous with their taste. They restore avant-garde, they restore studio, they restore foreign films. Some of their historical restoration are Carousel and The King and I. Dr. Strangelove was, I think, the first 4K in black and white, and they did it at Cineric. Monty Python, The Holy Grail, Jaws, Dracula, Frankenstein, you name it.
Night of the Living Dead.
It is the premium laboratory in the country, and beyond. They just opened up a branch in Portugal. In this festival, we have 3 of their films that were restored by them. Night of the Living Dead by George Romero, which we just discussed. Ernest Lubitsch's Forbidden Paradise, which I think was a hard restoration to pull off. And Kenji Mizoguchi of Ugetsu. And so these are just 3 of, and we are showing them here. Balasz and his wife Francine, who's here, and their son Eric, are also really generous with young filmmakers. Their facility is open for post-production and for screenings for young independent filmmakers. So it is my great honor to ask Balasz to come and speak about Cineric.
You didn't mention Stormy Weather,
Stormy Weather.
which they restored also with the Nicholas Brothers.
Everything I was going to say.
Please.
I want to put a plug in too, because we've worked together for a long time,
Yes.
and one of the most miraculous things that Balasz and his team and Simon at Cineric did was when I also with Marty produce documentaries, and there was a 16 millimeter work print footage of Bob Dylan on his 1975 Rolling Thunder Review tour. And these guys took what was literally like grease pencil marked. It was scratched. There was like green scratches across Dylan's face. And we were like, and at first we were like, how are we even going to deal with this footage? Maybe we use that as like kind of an artifact of the time. And Marty was like, no, I want it to look pristine. And he kept using that word pristine. And every time he would, I would kind of have a little minor heart attack. Anyway, these guys performed a miracle, what you see in the final film.
Yeah, and you will see.
Actually, you will probably see it in our demo.
Yeah, they prepare a reel a demo that Simon, one of Balaz's collaborators, will will go through. But you will see that few frames of the Rolling Thunder
Now
Review.
we have a short section on it to demonstrate the.
Use your mic.
I'm sorry. Which way?
Use mine and I'll put it on.
Is it on?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So anyway, you will see that we prepared a roughly 15-minute demo with 7, 8, or 9 clips of restoration. I feel that one picture is 1,000 words, and this is about 20,000 frames. So you will learn a lot. When you see this, you will know what we do mostly. But to tell you a little about Cineric, okay. It was incorporated and started immediately actually doing film restoration back in the early 80s. We got into this totally by accident. The way I got into this business totally by accident, I was studying engineering and mathematics, and I was looking for a job. And a fellow named János Pilenyi, who is still our production manager, said, well, why don't you come down for the summer and help us? We just started a company doing special effects. And I met the most amazing people who actually moved the technologies for film special effects and in general for imaging so much forward, and it was so exciting. So somehow I wound up staying and never leaving. So anyway, that's where we first computerized in 1971 the first optical printer, the first camera, introduced the liquid gate. Hawkesbury got the Academy Award for that. Although there was one 10 years before that by a man called John Lewis, who was a student of Albert Einstein at Princeton, who designed it, and it actually was the most perfect piece of equipment. We're still using it. And then Simon is here. Simon is the last working technologist, okay, who's moving things forward. And you will see we have to retro-engineer things. Sometimes it looks like we are connecting the Stonehenge with the latest computer, but it works, you know.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and but in order to sometimes, film was made in all kinds of different formats. Okay, starting from late 1800s, and every time some of these things come up, okay, you have to basically figure out the way how to even run these. Okay, so sometimes you have to reinvent and build new equipment. Even when we did the first two 55 millimeter films, the Carousel and King and I, there was absolutely no equipment left. There were no sprockets left. There was nothing left whatsoever. So we had to build 35 millimeter sprockets, 35 millimeter systems, 55 take-ups, and everything to be able to actually, run, digitize this film. Okay, and what interested me always is the technical challenges. Okay, and then so. Basically, from that on, okay, out of our first company came the first digital company, Digital Effects, okay, with Judson Rosebush. He's still working at Cineric as a technology consultant who basically wrote 300 articles on digital technologies and published 7 books. And he created the first motion graphics in history, Space Plus, which is in your collection at MoMA. But anyway, so Cineric was the company who got digital restoration. Us into the digital age for restoration, and then the world has changed. Okay, because now the opportunities and what we can do is just has been immensely expanded. Okay, we can for the first time get inside the image and actually fix things, but the challenges are huge. The rewards could be huge, but the problem is basically funding and work, like for everybody else. Just to give you a sample, okay, a simple thing like dirt and dust removal to be totally automated is much more complex than driving a self-driving car. Building a self-driving car, where billions and billions are spent every year to figure out this technology to make it bulletproof. Basically, the challenges of image recognition are much smaller than what you have to recognize in the universe that has been photographed. Okay, so even with the latest computer technologies, the challenges are much bigger, but we are operating on tiny budgets compared to them. I don't think in the entire film, in the entire world, more than $200 million are spent on film restoration itself. If that, right?
I mean, so interesting thing, just to interject for a second, because obviously there's this enormous technical and scientific work that goes into restoration, but then there's the aesthetic side. And what Cineric is just really, I think, unique amongst labs is that you know what film looks like. You know what it's supposed to look like. You're not recreating the look of the film and making it look like something that was shot yesterday.
Well, we were actually very lucky because we had early on we had a lot of very talented people who worked with film, but we were also very much interested in new technologies, computers, and managed to basically bring the two together. And I think that's what made our company always different. And on top of it, I would say 8 out of 10 in our staff have been studied film, and are filmmakers themselves. You know, made documentaries. Simon, who will do the presentation today on the demonstration.
It's crapping out now.
Just hold it under your mouth.
Yeah.
Just hold it
This
right
one
down there.
better.
Just hold it a little lower down.
Yeah, because what I think to what Balasz is saying, then just to clarify, the digital scanning gives you so much control over the image that you can make a film look perfect, you know, except that it's not what the filmmaker had in mind. And they're really good at gouging the...
Well, there are there are two schools. You know, most museums, including Museum of Modern Art, they would like to restore a film to the way it was when a film was first made, and that to them that's the holy grail, and that's perfectly fine. On the other hand, there are a lot of directors, you know, maybe to some extent even Margaret Scorsese, and the studios. Well, every director would say, every director, when we were doing special effects going back into the 60s and 70s, wanted their film to be as clean, as pristine, as beautiful as possible. So they would like their films restored beyond, you know, the way it looked when it first came out. You know, they had this off contrast, dirty opticals. They had all kinds of other problems. They picked up dirt. Things were far from perfect. But well, the truth is that every director and every cinematographer wanted a beautiful, perfect film, but it was not possible. But a lot of directors who look at their film today, he said, fix it up.
It was interesting because both Margaret and I think, sat at a session with George Romero's, you know, who was supervising the image for, you know, for Night of the Living Dead, and George had brought notes, and there were certain things he wanted to fix, and I think it was fairly conservative, but there was something, Margaret, that you wanted to change, and it was like no.
And they were production limitations because they had no budget. So Dave will probably talk about this.
Yeah, tonight. Yeah.
Also, as we get into the world of streaming, everybody wants things to look perfect, okay, and beyond the way it was when it was first created, okay. So all films, most films for the studios now have to be perfectly cleaned up, everything perfectly matched. And in some ways, they actually do look better, okay, when they were released. And so these are the two schools, but we actually follow the client's wishes.
I was wondering whether I'm starting the Q&A. I was wondering if there's two versions. Do you have a museum, a MoMA version, which looks like what it was when it was released, and the streaming version, which is super cleaned up?
Yes,
and
right, fancied up.
Do you have two different restorations? I never thought about that.
No, there are two different restorations. But you can start with the first one and then take it further. Okay?
Yeah.
And the studios do want to take it further.
Also,
Usually when we work with the studios, there's just one version.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
But it's clean, it's totally cleaned up and totally fixed up.
the other thing.
Bruce, don't start a Q&A now because
No,
we
I'm
have
not.
to go through the...
Well, can I? If I sit here, can I ask a question? But in the days of photochemical, often the DPs who are living, they didn't always get the results they wanted in 35 millimeters. So when they have a chance to go back in digital, they want to change things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. and sometimes to the extent where they want to re-edit the film.
Yeah.
That's where you have to stop.
But there's also aesthetic things too, where like, oops, I don't have my thing. You know, I always, you know, because our eyes are now getting adjusted to a digital image, and we're getting less forgiving of, you know, photochemical attributes. And so now when I see a restoration and I see the hair in the gate, I'll be like, did they not turn, like, you know, you kind of almost, it's like, because it stands out more. The more you clean up the rest of the image, those imperfections stand out. And when I went to see Paul Thomas Anderson's new film, Licorice Pizza, I was so delighted to see the real change. There's a little...
Wait a minute, Tarantino did that first, didn't he? With Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Probably.
And Marty kept the purple real changes in the red shoes restoration,
Well,
didn't he?
only for
Or was that
the...
Bob Gitz?
Bob Gitt insisted, and Marty obviously came along for the ride. He loved the idea. On the red shoes, you know, because it's 3 strips, those little...
People even know what they're for now.
But
You
they're
might-
like, they were all the colors. You could see all the colors in the little
Right.
bleep. And so, but Criterium's like, no, we can't have those on the DVD.
Oh, come on. The young people
You will
are...
never see those 3 dots streamed.
Really? I love them. But you know, can I sit here?
Can we? I was actually suggesting that we ask Simon to go to the
Okay,
demo, and then we
Simon.
open it to the Q&A.
So we will run this for you, and then you can ask questions.
Yeah.
And I think that will be probably the better part of my presentation. Okay. Here's Simon Lund. Okay. He's the director of developing technologies at Cineric, and he's the latest wunderkind doing all the things that move this film restoration forward. So, Simon. Ready?
Okay, we are open to your question, Barbara.
First of all, excuse me everybody, but it's like family for me here. I'd like to introduce myself as not only on the board of cinema here, but it is because of people here. I'm having a remarkable reunion. First, I'd like to thank Giulia for putting together this festival. It's just amazing. Honestly, since I've been involved with film preservation for 25 years, I have shown films where literally 2 or 3 people show up. So to see this today is really remarkable, and I'd like to say selfishly, the Lodge is responsible. You mentioned fundraising and generosity. Cineric has given, without question, I put the numbers together, at least $250,000 of in-kind contribution to the saving of films by women. So, thank you for that. And Margaret, just to finish up here, you may not know it, but one of the first films we preserved, you and Marty used a clip of it in your documentary about the blues.
Oh, which film?
It was called Raisin Cotton. I don't know if you remember it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was one of the first films, and it was sent to
Wow.
us by a relative of the woman who shot it. She was the great-granddaughter of a plantation owner.
Wow.
So we have stories, and I just have to say the definition of archivists, since I've had the joy of working with all of you, that little film we made in '95, what are archivists? I mean they are archivists, they are what, detective, you're a scenarist, you're writers, it's just remarkable. So thank you so much for your work.
Thank you, Barbara. That's great. Questions?
I'm still a little puzzled, just as not a technical person who I understand computers pretty well, but when you're digitizing a film and you're working from a 35mm print, are you, I think you had mentioned briefly that you're actually taking digital photos, you're scanning it,
Yes.
but in what increments to allow it to be a video form of seamlessness? Like how many?
I mean, it's
How many?
the
How many?
standard resolution, I guess that's how you measure it, is 4,000 pixels across by 3,000 high. Film tends to be 4:3 in aspect ratio. So you have about 12 million pixels within that image to record
Within
what's
one
on.
frame?
Yeah, for each
Within
frame.
one 35mm like little.
Yeah.
Oh my
And
God.
like that Swissorama film that's scanned in 8K by 8K, meaning 8,000.
Yeah.
And each frame is about 400 megabytes. So
Wow.
you need a lot of
That's a
storage
lot
for
of
all this.
spaghetti.
Exactly.
Can I ask about digital preservation? Because a few years ago I was worried about something I'd done in the 80s, and they said, "Oh, well, you have to put it on film if you want to preserve it." Digital was done in the 80s. So what's happening with all the digital film? I mean, I know there's an ocean of film which we're very concerned about, but there's also a gigantic ocean of digital material that you know.
It's
There's a tsunami of
Yeah.
digital.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Exactly.
it's mind blowing, really, because film was made by like relatively few people, but everyone's creating like enormous amounts of digital material.
I mean, film was never intended to be archival. It was just a coincidence that the material is very stable. Stable in the sense if you store it properly, you can have it last up to 500 years. With digital preservation, it's about the best right now is magnetic tape that lasts 5 to 10 years, and then you have to migrate it, and it's a big mess. I mean, it really
Well,
is.
it is a big mess, and it's horrendously expensive and time consuming. But I do understand that there are companies like Microsoft working on new technologies because they are frustrated with the instability of all this data. So there's some serious research being done of actually storing data in small glass cubes that will basically last indefinitely, and you don't have to chase constantly. For instance, and it's expensive for us also. Okay, we do work with films, and we do back them up at Cineric. Okay, so that if something happens to your film and your let's say, or your data, you lose it. Okay, you can still come back to it. We hold it for about 10 years. And so you can come back to us as okay, we can pull it up, okay, and give you a new copy, but the data is constantly growing. I mean, in fact, we have so many tapes now. Okay, we actually storing it in New Jersey in some storage facility, but it's just taking up constantly space. But beyond that, you constantly have to buy new equipment, the latest version to transfer this. Okay. For most of these things go on what they call an LTO tape, and now we are up to LTO 8. LTO 8 only will speak to LTO 7. Will not speak to LTO 5. So every second generation now you have to replace all these machines and basically all these recorders and so it's an ongoing expense, and it's an ongoing growing nightmare. So
Yeah, because with filmmakers, just talking about filmmakers who are actually making films for beyond home movies, for people to see, they're just, when they're done with the film, they want to go make another film. And in the past, the negative would just maybe go in a closet, or maybe go in an archive, or maybe be at a studio. So that was, maybe there could be a little room for benign neglect. But with digital, you can't just keep it on a hard drive in one place, in one copy. You could go back, it could be obsolete, the way that you read it. And that's something that just requires a level of, I think, attentiveness that most people don't really have time for, or have even the sense that it could be gone if you're not migrating it, if you don't have it stored in multiple places, if it's uncompressed or highly compressed. If it's highly compressed, it's not really appropriate for long-term storage. So it's really a problem. But with film, in terms of a storage, it is recommended. If you shot a film digitally and wanted to make sure that it was going to be around, you could output it to film, and that would be the ideal. Not many people can afford to do that, but
Studios don't do that.
they
it
do
is-
in certain
Well,
instances.
Tarantino, I know,
Well,
people like that.
It is,
Yeah.
it is very expensive, number one, okay,
Sure.
and number two, I don't even know how long we will be able to do that. We do record back after film. But my feeling is that when Kodak makes the last frame of film, it's over. It's extremely difficult already to deal with film because there are very few facilities and laboratories who know how to properly handle it. There's the people who used to do this are gone. Left long time ago, and young people don't want to. Most of the time, don't want to get involved with this, and it's a shrinking environment, and I mean, even in New York, where Kodak is having a laboratory out in Queens, the only thing they can do is basically develop a color negative. That's about it. Okay.
Yeah, for people who are making
nobody
films.
Nobody in New York can make you a print today. It's you have to go out to California to make it.
One lab.
What about overseas? Other labs overseas?
Some operation in London I keep hearing about, but I don't know how good
Or
that.
Japan?
Well,
Fujifilm doesn't exist anymore.
yeah, but all I'm saying is that it's
Waiting list is years
I think
long.
the days of film probably sadly are numbered, okay, because as soon as Kodak will seriously lose money,
Capture
okay, they're
medium,
gonna
some
stop.
life left, but as a projection medium, it couldn't be more dead.
I think they're
Is there any support on the legislative level for preserving film as a principal part of our culture, artistic heritage? I mean, the NEA is so completely underfunded. It's pathetic.
Yeah.
And we don't have a minister of culture here. We don't really go to any length whatsoever to
Yeah.
preserve our own artistic heritage. It's so frustrating. Is there any way of getting
There is, Congress actually authorized the creation of something called the National Film Preservation Foundation. And I think it was 1993 when they formed. And they do get funding. They get, I mean, it's a pittance compared to anything else in the budget, but I think they get, their annual funding helps them preserve orphan films, so-called orphan films that do not have commercial rights holders or any commercial potential.
And do you see any funding from this? Do you
We don't.
professionals?
They're the only organization.
Stop any of it.
Yeah, they're the National Film Preservation Foundation is the only, as I know it, the only film organization that gets any kind of federal money, because they're part of the Library of Congress's budget, and so that's as far as I know, and I know the field pretty well. There's no grants for fund. I mean, we received a grant from the State Department one time, but it was specifically for our educational curriculum.
So who does the work for the films that are in the National Library of Congress that are preserved? I mean, where are they coming from, and how many do they have, and is it substantial? Is it?
Well, a lot of films are deposited in the Library of Congress, okay, by studios.
Yeah.
And other former organizations who basically they were adopted but they took ownership, physical ownership of these films, and I understand they do work on it.
I think Kurt knows more about that.
Well, I'm a member of that board,
Oh, yeah,
and
yeah.
the National Film Preservation Board does zero film preservation.
Yeah.
None. It's just an honor to get on that list, the National Film Registry. But even if a film is on that list, it does not mean it has been
Right.
preserved, much less restored.
But the
Yeah.
library,
It's just named as one of our great films, right?
Yeah.
Every year,
Yes.
25 titles.
National
Yeah, that
treasure.
wasn't the idea in the beginning. It was.
but it can, the library does have, their own photochemical, they have the ability to preserve the films in their collection.
Yeah.
And they have just started working outside of the library on digital restorations. We're working with them on a few titles that are in progress right now. But I think the idea with the registry originally was the films get on the registry, and if they're not preserved, let's preserve them. But there's so many on the registry now.
Well, it started as an anti-colorization
That's right.
measure.
That's right.
Yeah.
Wasn't there some
If
legislation?
you got your film named to this registry, then you had to put a warning label on front of it if you colorized it or changed the format, which Ted Turner happily did the next day. But to the credit of the Librarian of Congress at that point, they made lemonade out of lemons and turned it into this program, which has been a good way to raise consciousness about these issues. But that's essentially it. It's a good chance for a bunch of us to get together in Washington and have a good chat and see what's going on. But
Well, to discover, especially to discover films. I mean, we saw so many things this year that the Ringling Brothers 1900 film.
something I found online, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
You
mhm.
found it online?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so
You
I guess
too?
we're not, we're not like going into the dark vaults
Dave can
anymore.
find anything online, by the way. You need any movies?
I think we have a question there.
Yeah, I have a question, not so much about the technology, you touched on it before. I don't know if it's the word ethics or what, but where's the line between restoration and making a slightly different film? Like if let's say the director is deceased, but somebody that was close to the production knew that there was a scene that had to be deleted either because of decency laws at the time or a studio attitude towards the scene, or an actor didn't like the particular take. Is there a general consensus in the preservation community of what is restoration and what is, basically creating a different version of a film? And I'm not talking about like where directors alive. I mean, there's so many versions of Apocalypse Now out that I can't even keep track of them, and they've all been with Francis's participation. But in terms of where the original filmmaker is no longer among us, how do you deal with that?
Well, we are a technical service, okay, and we're not supposed to make these decisions. I think Margaret can probably talk a little
Yeah,
bit more
I
about
mean-
who makes this decision. Normally, it's the client's call.
Yeah,
Okay?
and the
And if somebody walks through the doors of Cineric and unless they demand something totally insane or unethical, clearly so unethical, then we have to do it because we would be breaking the law if we just basically don't do perform our service.
I mean, I wouldn't say that we get many unreasonable requests. I think usually the people coming in to us are very aware of these ethical issues and are conscientious about making choices about if there was something cut out of the film, was it really the director's final choice, or was it just something that happened late in the editorial process? So I think people are serious about this.
Will make several cuts. You have the director's cut, the original director's cut, and then the different cut, and the international cuts. Sometimes there are 6-7 cuts, okay, of the same film. But again, that's not our business, okay, how this gets distributed and to what extent it gets restored or what they removed, okay, that's not what we do.
I think Margaret and also Bruce can probably address
Yeah, I mean,
this, because there is you used the word painting before. I think there is a degree of creative.
Yeah, I
thing
mean,
in this. And
it's very
choices.
rare that we do have a director who is still with us, who can kind of help guide, because most of the films we restore are really old, or that we I mean, the majority of films don't have that. But what we'll do in working with the archives and working with labs is, you try to find anyone who was a collaborative on the crew, whether they were a producer or a DP, or in the instance of, like we talked about with Chess of the Wind, I mean, Muhammad Aslani is with us, but you find, a son and his DP, and you find a son or a daughter, who, with Ousmane Sembène, we were restoring his father, we were restoring La Noire 2, and his son was on the set. I mean, he knew enough about the making of the film. Anyway, so we try to guide it, but it's a light touch, I mean, you don't go in and insert a scene that you maybe think a director might have wanted in there. You stick to the release version. And so that's kind of we take a pretty conservative approach, and unless it's something like, like with the Red Shoes, where, there's no way Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger wanted there to be fringing of the colors. If they would have wanted those color records to be registered. So that's like a technical improvement, but it's not changing the film. It's just changing it in a way for the better experience of the
That's a
audience.
problem with old Technicolor prints. A lot of them are out of register. I mean, the first prints for the, right, Dave? I mean, a lot of release prints that you see are totally out of register, and they're so sharp. That's got to be an improvement.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up. Okay, that's one of the first fruits of bringing in the computer. That's by 1980, when we started restoration for the first time, with computers we were able to scene register all three states perfectly.
Right.
In fact, that was our claim to fame back then. If you want to do
It still is.
It also helps to have an original release print, doesn't it? When you're doing a restoration.
Well, original release print is, remember, Technicolor release prints varied also, from print to
But I'm not necessarily talking about Technicolor, but any vintage film.
We didn't even care about it, because we said, we just have to, all scenes should be perfectly registered. I mean, that was the goal back then, to register it. Whatever, later on, as Technicolor was getting phased out, the process got sloppy, and you had more and more registration and other problems, the developing problems. But the holy grail was always to have it perfectly registered and as free of mottling as possible.
But beyond black and white, I remember the first time I ever visited Cineric. It must have been 25 years ago, and it was one of the first DCPs. Paramount had just restored Sunset Boulevard. It was really early. It was really early days, and it didn't look great. And then they showed a reel off the original negative. Oh, look at the difference now. Well, the original negative was so much more beautiful. And first of all, and nowadays they can match. No, I didn't say you did it. I just said I saw it at Cineric. But it was a revelation, because I've been watching Sunset Boulevard on television my whole life, and the opening scenes in Norma Desmond's mansion were bright, but in the original prints it was a very dark scene, and that's something you can emulate now, that kind of thing.
You have to take those prints really with a grain of salt to say, was this an original release print? Did the director supervise it? Was this made later? Has it faded over time?
And it could also have been an answer print that was rejected,
I mean,
and it's just
That's
out,
true.
and some collector picked it up.
especially
We saw that with Thief of Baghdad. There were
in
so
Europe,
many
it's-
variations of the color on that. What's that?
You have more of those floating around than
Yeah.
anything else.
In Europe especially, there's a legal deposit with most governments that if you produce a film with government funding, you have to deposit a print. And almost always that was a rejected print from the laboratory.
And same with the Library of Congress,
Save
probably.
some money, yeah.
But there's also documentation, some documentation with older films, is there not? Like memos from the DP or how they want to achieve something. Do you work with stuff?
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
If you
I
have
mean,
it, yes,
yeah.
yeah.
But it doesn't always exist.
But but in some ways, the first best guide is to have somebody as a color corrector who has seen thousands of films and corrected thousands, because he will know pretty much instinctively what this should look like. I mean, we'll be very close to what it should look like. Occasionally, yes, it's important, okay, where you would not think that a scene would be totally dark, okay, and but it does help, okay, to have would help to have a good print.
We need an apprentice program for young people to learn about color, because color correction and color timing is so specific, and if you're operating in a void and you have no knowledge and experience with these films, that's something that we've actually often talked about at the foundation, is like where I mean, it's like in an ideal world, you would have these apprenticeships with Danny.
I think also the repertory theaters are very important for that, of having a film projector in the booth and being able to exhibit film prints.
Yeah.
And I think in general to encourage, this is not just to say good things about the SAG Harbor Cinema, but in general to encourage viewers to come to the cinema to see. You create like a memory for the visual language, and then it sticks. And then when a movie doesn't look good, and you start to appreciate. So it's kind of an educational process all together in all these different stages.
Yeah.
And there is a question there.
Yeah, actually I have two now. One is in relation to what you're saying. I was thinking of the young people who go to high school here, and the idea of the beauty of the theater and seeing Red Shoes here. If there might be a screening of that for the students and arrange it so the students can actually sit in the theater and watch the Red Shoes. And
We always encourage the students to come. I don't know if there are students of Sag Harbor, but I see some young
Thank you, I like
Yeah.
you.
some young people out
That's
there,
great.
so I'm very encouraged
but the other question,
if they're joining us.
the other question I had is to April's point, which I think her asking about federal money is the idea of how you build funding. And I wanted to sort of open the question about David Packard, because for the Library of Congress, David Packard's financial support has been so important in opening.
And UCLA.
Yeah, is that right?
Yeah,
So-
he underwrote both
He
of their
single-handedly,
campuses. Yeah.
he has really kind of, I mean, he looms large in preservation, because I think he's spent hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars on UCLA and the Library of Congress and on preservation projects and the Stanford Theater. I mean, he's really,
And that's only because at age 40 he saw Wizard of Oz for the first time.
Oh, God.
That's true.
But is there anyone else like him? In other words,
No.
No.
Absolutely not. And he's rather anonymous now also. He stays in the background.
doesn't want to be, I mean, we tried to
Yeah.
get like an award for him. He has no interest in that at all. But there's no one else like him. There really is
No.
nobody else like him. Not at the level, you can't even come close.
Are you listening, David? There's no one else like you.
Maybe we should ask Jeff Bezos to raffle off
Yeah, well, we'll send him into space.
Donated to film restoration.
Oh, yeah.
But I think, one of the things too is that with federal funding and state funding, it's like something like the Sag Harbor Cinema, it's like communities need the arts. I mean, it's like a basic thing, but the arts are just expected to fend for themselves all the time. We've just, had so many conversations in DC, and there's just in America, there's just this idea that everything should be profitable.
That's true.
And if you can't make a profit, then the community doesn't need it. But you look around this country, and it's like
But what's
places
great
that
now
don't
is-
have theaters and venues for music and performance. Who wants to live there?
But
You know.
little cinemas like this are popping up all over the
Yeah.
country now. And a lot of it has to do with digital. Digital makes accessibility easier for these theaters. 35 is really expensive and cumbersome, and the shipping prints. The year we switched over to DCP, we saved $30,000 in shipping bills.
And yet you added a new.
And we also our
you-
prints from Italy.
But then you added when you restored the theater, you added another pair of 35 millimeter
No.
projectors.
No, we added one digital screen, which is remote control. No, we have 3 screens with 35 millimeter changeovers and
Yeah.
one digital screen, all digital.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we have a question there.
Oh yeah, I'm just absolutely fascinated with how it's being democratized to work with film digitally and purchase films, and how I collect films, and sometimes I go into antique stores and I find original 16 millimeter home movies from say the 30s that have
Yeah,
been,
that's great.
I don't know how long they've been there, but I'll project them at home on the 16 millimeter projector, and I'm just so blown away by the sharpness of these original prints. Some smell like vinegar, other don't. And if I had money, I'd send it out to get it digitized, but if not, I would frame by frame take a photo of every image. I'm an animator, so it's not that terrible, but yeah, I'm just, I don't know, I'm just thrilled at what you all do.
MoMA has a home movie program, don't they, Dave? Where
A
you,
lot of places do, but yeah, we.
yeah, but you could donate them to MoMA and they'll preserve them,
There's also
correct?
a center. There's a
Yeah.
center for home movies, and they do have a day where you can bring your films, and they'll make a digital copy. But I don't know. If you go to their website, I think they go. I don't know what they've been doing in the past year and a half,
We
but
do it locally, so just talk to me later.
Oh, Joe Laura will take them in.
Can I suggest we bring this conversation upstairs where there is a branch and you can also, it can be happening in a more.
Can I plug my home movie since I have the? No, my home movie is in the Nicholas Brothers show tonight. The Nicholas Brothers had a 16mm camera in the 1930s, and they were filming in Hollywood on Broadway, and I'm showing it tonight. Okay, good night. Have to plug it.
Thank you so much for coming, and I hope we'll see you upstairs. And thank you for the patience in this very loose format, with this very loose format.